Yesterday, we learned the main topic of this week's Torah portion, which was the marriage of Yitzchak, Abraham's son, with Rivka. And Abraham sends his servant, Eliezer. We've been talking about that every morning. Eliezer to carry out this incredible task, and it explains that according to Kabbalah, that this is basically the beginning of Torah and commandments, unifying the spiritual with the physical. Yitzchak, the son of Abraham, he was a very holy person. He was holy from the womb. His father gave birth to him after his father had been circumcised. He was the only child that Abraham had after he was circumcised. Well, I mean, we'll see. Anyway, he was the first child that he had after he was circumcised. And also Yitzchak was circumcised at 8 days old. He was the first person to be sacrificed at 8 days old. Ishmael was circumcised when he was 13 years old. And Abraham, of course, was 99 years old. And the circumcision, that brought holiness into the physical world. It brought God's infinite blessing into the physical world. So, and Yitzchak only lived in Israel. Abraham did not want Yitzchak to leave Israel. He says he was a pure sacrifice, Ola Tamima. And this is after Yitzchak had been willingly went with his father to be sacrificed in the Akedah. And of course, we know that an angel stopped it. It was only a test. And he got married to Rivka. And Rivka was exactly the opposite. Rivka came from outside of Israel. And her father, Bethuel, even though he came from the family of Abraham, but her father, Bethuel, was a idolater. And her brother, Lavan, was a charlatan, master scammer, as we're going to see later on. And she came from in general, from a not holy background. And nevertheless, that Yitzchak took her out. So this was the connection between the physical, the godly, represented by Yitzchak, and the mundane, represented by Rivka. And so that was the main subject of this Torah portion. And it took a long time to say it. It told the story of Eliezer, as we saw. It told the story that he went to find a bride, and the conditions that he made to God. He said, God, please send me a sign. And he delineated exactly what the sign was supposed to be. And then exactly what he said, it happened. So it repeats it already twice. And then when he meets Rivka's family, so he repeats the story again, a whole long story. So why? Because it says that the details of this story that prepares the way for the Torah, just like I said, uniting the spiritual and the physical, uniting God with the world. Okay, so he says that afterwards that Yitzchak took Rivka into the tent of his mother's tent. We did this yesterday. And he took Rivka and made her his wife, and he loved her. And then he was comforted after his mother, and it says because when his mother was alive, so there was a cloud of glory hanging over the house when his mother was alive, and that when she would light the candles on Shabbat, they would remain lit the whole week, and there was a blessing in the bread that she made, that it served a lot of people and didn't end. And that as soon as Sarah died, as it went away, and when Rivka came, it came back. So that and he was comforted after his mother Okay, now it's telling us apparently things which are not anywhere near as important or even dealing with the Jewish people as the story we just finished learning. But in fact, everything that's written in the Torah has the exact same importance. It's all the Word of God. So a lot of these things are just really shrouded in mystery. But we'll see that it does have a peripheral connection to Judaism. So let's see. Yosef Avram b'yikach isha. Abraham went back and he took a wife, and her name was Keturah. Her name was Keturah. What do we care what his wife's name was? So he says, well, Keturah, this was really Hagar. Hagar was the handmaid of Sarah that Sarah gave to him when she couldn't give birth. So Sarah gave Hagar to Abraham to have children, and sure enough, she had Yishmael. And Yishmael came out to be bad news. And finally, Sarah said, evict them. So he had to evict Sarah and Yishmael from the house. And in doing so, he also evicted them from his portion and from the portion of Abraham. And as the Or HaChaim pointed out, that Abraham did not give birth to Yishmael when he was called Abraham. Nowhere in the Torah does it connect Yishmael to Avraham, only to Avram. Before he was circumcised, then he gave birth to Yishmael. In any case, so he takes this Keturah, and this is Hagar. This is the mother of Yishmael that he evicted, kicked her out of the house. Why is she called Keturah? Because Shena'im Ma'aseh Ketoret, that her deeds were good like the incense in the holy temple. And it also says another thing is Keturah means to be tied. So she tied something around her, between her thighs, so she could not have relations with any other man from the day that she left Abraham. Now this Keturah, or Hagar, she was the daughter of Paro. She was the daughter, she left everything in order to be with Abraham. But nevertheless, she was kicked out of his house, mainly because of Yishmael, that he did idolatry. We're going to see in a couple of lines that Yishmael himself, he did tshuva. He regretted what he did, and he changed his whole way of life. We'll see. And the Kli Yakar says that's what happened to Keturah also, to Hagar. That Hagar, her deeds were not good. She made fun, it says, of Sarah and etc. But she also changed her ways. That's what he explains, the Kli Yakar. So she changed her ways, and Abraham took her back to be his wife. Okay. And she gave birth to him. Who did she give birth to him? Zimran, Yakshan, Madan, Midian, Yishbak, and Shuach. Who are these people? And it says that she brought these children up in the house of Abraham. In the Hebrew. Okay. And Yakshan gave birth to Shva. And Dadon, and the sons of Dadon were Ashurim, Ulatushim, Ulaumim. These people never appear again in the Torah, but nevertheless, Rashi says that they were all very important. In their times, they were tremendously important. Shem Roshe Umot. They were the heads of Ashurim and Latushim and Ulaumim. These were the head of whole nations. And Onkelos, he says, in this case, I can't exactly, Rashi says, I don't exactly agree with the explanation that Onkelos gives, that he says, okay, anyway. Lutushim, these were people that lived in tents, like Bedouins. Amitpazrim anavana, they're scared all over the place, scattered all over. V'nosim ish b'olei of dato af dano. Each one takes his tent and travels different places, like the Bedouins. And also says Netushim al Panei Ka'oz, they lived in the whole land. Okay. There's big, long explanations, etc., who these people are. The sons of Midian, we're still talking about all these sons the offspring from Hagar, who is now called Keturah. And the sons of Midian were Ephah, Efer, V'chanoch, V'avidan, V'eldaah. Call Elu, these are the sons of Keturah. But Abraham gave everything he had to Yitzchak. Rashi says, Somer Rabach Nani, that he had the blessing, a parchment of blessing he gave to him. That God said to Abraham, you will be a blessing. The blessings are all given into your hand. You can bless whoever you want to. Now Abraham gave that over to Yitzchak. Now Yitzchak had the power to bless whoever he wanted to. Here he asks a question, how can you do it? It says in the Gemara that people shouldn't give everything they have to their family. So he says, well, really, Abraham was Abraham and Yishmael he was leaving Yishmael out from his inheritance. So he said, well, Yishmael, Abraham, Yisrael, that really they were actually converts. Abraham's father was not Jewish, and Yishmael's mother was not Jewish. So it says a ger it doesn't officially have the law of an inheritor from his family. So therefore, he was able to bypass this law that a person should not take away, even if he has a bad son, he shouldn't take away everything he has from him and give it to his good son. Not supposed to do that. But here he's circumvented that because Ishmael wasn't really Jewish, so Abraham didn't really owe him anything. And Abraham was also not so beholden to this law because the law was given to a Jewish father and a Jewish child. And Abraham, of course, was Jewish, but he was a convert. And in this way, he didn't inherit his parents. So he wouldn't. Okay, now here's an interesting sense. Abraham he had two wives, right? He had Sarah, she passed away, and he had Keturah, but he also had Pilagshim. Now, Pilagshim, these are women that without a marriage contract, what they call it, common law wives. And you're going to see that this was also Hagar. We're going to see Rashi says, a Pilagshim, which were to Abraham, Avram gave gifts, and he sent them away from Yitzchak, so they wouldn't be with Yitzchak while Yitzchak was still alive, while Abraham was still alive. Abraham sent them away, Kedma, to the east, El Eretz Kedem, to the lands of the east. So Rashi says, who are these Pilagshim? Rashi says it's written Pilagshim to show in the Torah. If you look, it's written without a yud. Pilagshim. It says really he only had one Pilagish, and this was Hagar, and this is Keturah. It says Nashim, a wife, is with a marriage document. A Pilagish is without a marriage document. So it says, but like King David with Nashim and the Pilagshim. So that's what it says. Abraham, it doesn't say that he married. It says V'yikach Isha. He took a woman. What does it mean he took her? He didn't marry her. That was his Pilagish. And he says all these children that she had, he gave them gifts and he sent them to the east. Now, what are these gifts exactly? What are they? It says Natan Matanot, Pirshu Rabbeinu, the rabbis explain in Breshit that he gave them mystical names. He gave them mystical, magical names that he gave to them. The Dat Zakanim said that how could he misuse the name of God like that and give them these mystical names? So he said, no, he gave them names of demons, which it's permissible to, it's called Mashbiah Shadim. It's permissible to get information from these demons or from the upper worlds. Anyway, whatever it is, he sent them to the east. Some people say that this is where Hinduism came from. This is where the Hindu religion came from. because Hindu also has these mantras and things like that. And the Hindus, the highest level you can achieve in the Hindus, whatever it is, and the caste system is a Brahman. Brahman, they say, come from Avrama. Who knows if it's true? But anyway, that's what people say. Another explanation. So anyway, he gave them all these mystical, magical, occult names. And he sent them to the east. He sent them far away from this. Ibn Ezra says he gave them money. He gave them gifts. He gave them money. What is this? All the mystical stuff. He gave them money. And that's one explanation. He said he gave to the sons of the Pilagshim. It says, but he didn't give anything to Yishmael. He gave to all those that were born after Yishmael. Okay, anyway. He gave them gifts, didn't give them an inheritance. He gave them gifts in the sense that they weren't connected to him anymore. It says, that's what he says over here. The Dat Sakanim says that it says in the Gemara Perachelik in Sanhedrin that he gave them these mystical, occult, impure names. And so he says, how could it possibly be a thing like that? So he said, no, he gave them names of these different powers and things like that. They weren't holy. Okay. And these are the days of the life of Abraham that he lived, 100 years, 70 years, and 5 years. That's what he says. When he was 100, he was like he was 70, and when he was 70, he was like he was 5. What does it mean? Without any sin. Didn't have any sin. They say that Abraham was supposed to have lived 180 years. That's going to be the amount of time. 80 years, 180 years he was supposed to live. But he only lived 175 because God shortened his life so he wouldn't see Esav become evil. After Esav was 13 years old, it says he went out. Esav was his grandson. He didn't want to, so therefore he shortened his life. That's what it says. He was lacking 5 years before the day earlier, because that was the day that Esav did 5 sins. And therefore he said, Asher Chai. It doesn't say the years that were set for him. It says that these are the amount of years that he actually lived from the 180 years he was supposed to live. Any case, Abraham was weak, and he died, and at old age, old and satisfied, and he was gathered to his people. Gathered to his people. It was his soul was gathered to the bundle of souls. It says the Tzurah Achayim, the Safrono. He says he was gathered to what's called the bundle of life, eternal life, with all of the tzaddikim, the righteous people of all the ensuing generations that will come afterwards. Because it's true that there's a lot of difference between, these different tzaddikim in the different generations. The righteous people, the righteous Jews, they didn't get to the level of Abraham, but nevertheless, all of them merit what's called the world to come. They get a little taste of the infinity, which is going to be the lot of every Jew in the raising of the dead. But they get it a little bit early. Okay, Kli Yakar, I would like to go over it, but it's very beautiful. Rabbi Shlomo Lunchitz, but again. Okay, Yitzchak and Yishmael buried him in Marat HaMachpelah. Yitzchak and Yishmael buried him. Oh, how did Yishmael get over here? So it says Yishmael, from here says Rashi, we see that Yishmael, he repented, he did tshuva. And he went together, and Yitzchak was even before him. It says Yitzchak was first. He let Yitzchak go before him, even though the Yishmael, of course, was older. And this is the Seva Tova. This is what's called the good age, the Seva Tova, the good old age. Namely, he saw his sons and Yishmael also repent. So he gave it to this is the field that Abraham bought from the Bnei Chet, which we talked about before. And there it goes. Now, it says, after Abraham died, and God blessed Yitzchak, and Yitzchak lived in a place called Be'er Lachai Ro'i. Okay, and now it says the children of Yishmael, which I think we can skip over this. Let's just look very, very quickly at this Haftorah of this week. The sons of Yishmael, where they're born, Yishmael, Nevayot, and Kedar, and Elba. Okay, obviously there's some sort of mystical reason here why this is here. I don't know what it is, and I certainly can't teach it. So here we go. Let's do the Haftorah. Where's the Haftorah? So maybe we should stop. We'll come back to this, huh? Yeah, let's just do it. Ready? Okay, so in this week's Torah portion, it said that Abraham was old, coming in days. And that's why he said, I have to marry off my son. So it says the same thing about King David. King David, now this is not a prophecy. This is just from the book of Kings, the beginning of the book of Kings. Now, if you remember, the book of Samuel talks about David's life and how he was chosen and etc., and the battles that he fought. And the book of Kings begins with the death of King David. And here it is. So we'll go over it quickly. You can also look in the English. It's not really, difficult words or difficult ideas like with Isaiah. King David was old, coming in days, and they covered him with garments. And it was only 70 years old, right? But he was covered in garments. They covered him with garments, and he was cold. It was still cold. So they said as servants, let's look for a girl, a virgin girl, and she can come to the king, and she'll warm the king up. And we didn't have any really sexual relations with her. She'll lay together with the king, and the king will be warm. So they looked for a girl all around, and they found Avishag HaShunamit. And they say this was the sister of the Shunammite that we learned about last week with the Isha Shunammite, that her son, with the oil, right? Pouring the oil, we said that she didn't have any money. And okay. So that's the Shunammite. So the God Shunammite, and they came, brought her to the king, and she was very, very beautiful. And she warmed up the king, and the king did not have any relations with her. Now, King David had a lot of sons, and he had a lot of trouble from his sons. And one of them that he had trouble with early was Absalom. But right at the end of King David's life, there was another son called Adoniah. Now you can imagine that the sons of King David were pretty talented people, and they were all sons of a king. So they all had to various degrees the quality of royalty. So one of them, it sort of went to his head, and his name was Adoniyahu, the son of Chagit. So Adoniyahu, he elevated himself, and he said, I'm going to be the king. My father's going to die soon. I'll be the king. And he made for himself a chariot and riders in front of him, and 50 riders and 50 people running in front of him. And his father never stopped him and asked him, why are you doing? Why are you doing this? And also, he was very beautiful, this Adoniyahu. He was given birth to after Absalom. Absalom was the one that made him trouble. And he spoke to Yoav. Now, Yoav ben Surya, he was the minister of war. He was the supreme general of King David's army. Yoav, he was like David's right man. Yoav, it says that he fought the battles in order that King David could learn Torah. And King David's learning Torah, that helped Yoav, and he helped King David. So he got together with Yoav ben Surya. Suddenly, Yoav ben Surya, he defected. He went over to the side of this Adoniyahu, and another person, Aviatar HaKohen. And they went and helped Adoniyahu. Okay, meanwhile, now the politics comes in. Now, Adoniyahu, he's doing the wrong thing. He didn't ask his father's permission, but he gets two big shots from King David's government and really close friends of King David, especially Yoav. And Yoav is going to get killed because of this. You're going to see David is going to order that he get killed too, that he pay with his life. And Sadok Cohen and Benio Ben Yehoyada, they and Natan a Navi, Natan the prophet, and there was also Shimi and his friends, and all these people that were with King David. They weren't together with Adoniyahu. And Adoniyahu, meanwhile, he's making this big party, and he's making his inauguration party, and he's sacrificing sheep and cows and, fine, whatever it is, fine cattle. And he's at this place called Evan Hazochelis, which is near Ein Rogel. Anyway, so he called all of his brothers and the sons of the king and all the people of Yehuda, all the servants of the king, and he also called Natan a Navi, who he didn't know was with King David, and Benio and Navi. And he also called Solomon, Shlomo. Now, Shlomo was supposed to be the king afterwards, and Shlomo didn't know what was going on over here. He didn't want to make a war. And so he called of them, but Natan a Navi and Benio in the Geburim, this King Solomon, his brother, he didn't call them because he was worried maybe they could be that they will be with King David. He didn't know. So he figured he'll do it quietly, or at least so that nobody will know, or at least he won't invite them. Anyway, Natan a Navi, who was one of those who was against Adoniyahu, he told Bathsheba. Now, Bathsheba, that was the wife of King David. She gave birth to King Solomon. And she was the one that King David, so to speak, got punished for, because she had been officially married to Uriah Hachiti, and that King David sent Uriah Hachiti into battle to be killed so that he could get married to Bathsheba, which Uriah Hachiti was, he was a traitor anyway to King David. Anyway, so this Natan a Navi, he calls Bathsheba, one of King David's wives, his favorite wife. And he said, did you not hear that that Adoniyahu, the son of Chagit, is making himself a king? And King David, he didn't know. And now let's go and see if we can give King David some sort of advice, and you'll save your soul and the soul of your son. Now, if Adoniyahu becomes a king, as he could very well be that he'll start killing any of his potential enemies, which in a way he would have the right to do because they would be against the king. He can't go against the king. Just like King Saul, he tried to kill King David. And because he didn't know that King David was a king, that King David had been chosen by Samuel the prophet, and that Shaul had been rejected. He didn't know that. Anyway, so it's forbidden to go against the king, no matter what you're. So if Adoniyahu becomes the king, then it's going to be troubles for Shlomo and for Shlomo's mother, Bathsheba. So Natan a Navi comes and says, listen, let's go into the King David and let's say, my master the king, didn't you say that you were going to make Solomon, your son, Shlomo, that he was going to be the king? And Shlomo, he's going to be your king, and he's going to sit on the throne. Why is Adoniyahu the king? I mean, you obviously must have chosen. Did you make a mistake? They were talking to each other and making this plan, and Medabrim Sham Hine. So this is what Natan says. Go into King David and tell him, excuse me, my dear husband, you're my master, the king. Didn't you say that King Solomon, your son, was supposed to be king? And now Adoniyahu, he's the king. Did you pick him? and we're going to do it like this. While you're talking with the king, I'm going to come afterwards, and I'm going to verify what you said. So Bathsheba, she came into his room. The king was very, very old. Avishag, the Shunammite, this beautiful lady, she was serving the king. And Bathsheba bowed down to the king, and she said, how are you, master, my husband? And then she said to him, no, I'm sorry. The king, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. The king said, Malach, what do you want, Bathsheba? What do you want? That's when she said to him, my master, you swore by God that Solomon would be the next king, and he's going to sit on your throne. King David said, yeah, I mean, that's right. But now Adoniah, he's making himself the king. And you didn't know? And he's making all sorts of offerings and making a big meal. He's calling to all of the other sons of the Melech, and to Aviatar Kohen, and to Yoav ben Surya, and he's calling them, and to your son Shlomo, he didn't call. And now, my master the king, everybody is looking at you to say, what's going on? Who's going to sit on your throne after you? Just as King David, and it will be that when you pass away, so then me and my children, Shlomo, will be sinners because we're going to oppose Adoniah. While they're speaking with the king, so Natan HaNavi, the prophet Natan HaNavi, he comes and he says to the king, excuse me, master, your lord, the king, did you know what Adoniah was doing? Natan HaNavi, here he is. And he came in front of the king and he bowed down to the king and he said, Natan said, my master, the king, did you say that Adoniah was going to rule after you? He's sitting on the throne. That he's gone down today and he's sacrificing all sorts of sacrifices, and he's calling to all the sons of the king. He repeats what Bathsheba said to Aviatar Kohen, and they're all eating and they're drinking in front of him, and they're saying, "Long live the king Adoniah." And isn't that so that to me, your servant, myself, and to Tzadok Kohen and the Ben Yehoyada, and to Shlomo, he didn't call us. Why didn't he call us? If this is what the king wants, so let it be this way, right? But why didn't you tell us who is going to sit on the throne of the king after you? King David said, what is going on? What are you talking about? Immediately call my wife, Bathsheba. Bathsheba came in front of the king. She stood in front of the king, and King David swore, and he said, by the life of God, that it redeemed me from all of my enemies, just like I swore to you by God, the God of the Lord of Israel, saying that Shlomo is going to be the king, and he's going to sit on my throne. So it will be to this day. This is what's going to be. And they all bowed down, and they said, Yechi Adoni Amelech La'olam. That's the end of this, right? Yes. And they said, Yechi Adoni Amelech David La'olam. Long live King David forever. May King David live forever. Now, this is a little bit sort of strange, because let King David live forever. What does that mean? I mean, King David is dying, right? That they know that he's dying. And it was sort of an accepted thing that he only had 70 years to live. Because he got years from Adam. It was the 70 years that Adam only lived 930 years. So there's missing 7 years. So he said, long live King David. Yechi Adoni Amelech David La'olam. Later on, we're going to see that when they appoint King Solomon, they're going to say the same thing. Yechi Adoni Amelech David La'olam. May the king live forever. And this, interestingly enough, is a thing that the Lubavitcher Rebbe said that we should say about the Mashiach. You should say, Yechi HaMelech, long live the king. And the Hasidic Chabad, because they learned the Rambam and they saw that all of the criterion of Mashiach are fulfilled by the Rebbe. And the Rambam says clearly that you have to be waiting this person's arrival. You have to be expecting him to arrive. And if you don't, then you're denying the whole entire Torah. That's what the Maimonides says. So this is a sign of declaring a king. So they said, "Long live the king forever." Now, King David, he was on his last breaths. You know, it was I don't know how long after this that he lived, but it wasn't that long. And nevertheless, they say, may he live forever. So this basically is what we say in Kiddush Levana, that we say, David Melech Yisrael Chai V'Kayom. May King David live forever. In other words, in fact, the matter is that King David did not really die. The King David is living forever. It says that here his soul didn't die, or David Melech. Nevertheless, we say that King David is alive forever. So nothing is going to stop the Mashiach, and Mashiach is going to not only live but enliven everyone. He'll orchestrate the whole raising of the dead. So it makes sense to say that he'll also be one that'll be impervious to death. However it is, we'll see it soon, God willing. This is the Haftorah of the week. Tomorrow morning at 8:15, God willing, we will learn Chassidut. We'll finish the Devar Malchut, the amazing, beautiful, fantastic speech, also exciting and inspiring speech that the Rebbe gave to his emissaries in 1992. The last time he spoke to his emissaries, and it's a message and he appointed us as his emissaries, each and every one of us, and so it's worthwhile to listen to. So tune in tomorrow, 8:15 in the morning. God bless you all. Have a good day with Mashiach now.